had one that earlier, and any returning members? Anyone in the room a new member or maybe new visitor? All right, awesome. Thanks for coming. Whether you're a member or not, that's what it was. I got it mixed up. We got some new visitors and maybe some new members. Thanks a lot, everybody. And did everybody notice this adorable little mason bee that is on the agarita? If you've got agarita anywhere, it's just starting to bloom. You can smell it like crazy right now. In order to see these guys, you have to kind of watch a little bit. They're really fast. They really don't like their photo taken. They really don't like to be looked at, but and they blend in perfectly. So take a little time and watch your agarita closely. You might find one of these guys. Okay, we are really excited to unveil our Chapter Nice program. We don't quite have everything yet up online, but it will be coming online soon. We have developed this chapter program to partner with nurseries. And so the NICE program stands for Natives Improve and Conserve Environments. And for the San Antonio chapter program, we felt it was really important to have this recognition for nurseries that really are not only just selling some natives or just interested in having that designation, but they're really going above and beyond. And so for our program, we're requiring that our partners do not sell plants that are on the Texas Invasives database. And so if y'all are familiar with that, thank you, Rachel. If y'all are familiar with that, not all of the plants in that database are a problem. In fact, many of them are already restricted by the state, but some of them are a major problem for our native plant communities and our natural areas, and they are sold in the nurseries. And so we felt it was important that if we wanted to give a designation and partner, that we made that a requirement. So we're looking forward to working with any nurseries to be a partner. That being said, we will work with any nursery to help educate on native plants, regardless of whether they're a nice partner or not. So watch for this, watch for our designated nurseries coming soon, our application process, and all of the details on our website. Okay, speaking of nice nurseries, the Medina Garden Nursery was a designated nice nursery for both the Fredericksburg and Kerrville chapters. And Jerry Morrissey is going to come up and speak. We had a great loss recently.
Yes.
Come up to the, watch your step, maybe come down.
Medina Garden Nursery was opened in 1999. And it's been a favorite of all of the Native Plant Society chapters here in the area. And basically it's because of the variety of plants, but also the friendly nature of Ernesto Carino and Ishmael Espinosa here. Ernesto passed away recently, and I was able to attend, services for him. But what was so great besides the plants is it was the smiles and the friendliness. When you came up there, you could get a lemonade or something like this, So you went up there, and one of the stories that I heard from one of the people there was that it took 3 phone calls to get his wife to get to one of the Bernie guys to leave the nursery, because it's such a beautiful, beautiful place. And you're showing there what they did put in is they did put in a meadow there, with a lot of, native plants here and stuff. It's close to the Medina River up there. It's in the town of Medina, So not only did you get to go there, you also got to go to the Apple store and all this stuff and whatever. But anyhow, Ishmael is, after a while, is going to try to maintain the nursery, keep providing, because they went out and searched for plants in the hill country of Texas, and actually put them in propagation so that you could get them. So I'm hoping that that's successful, and I hope that if he's able to do it, we can all come up and enjoy. Maybe we should even have an outing. I mean, that would be one way to get people just to have an outing. Mary back there probably knows him really well. Did you know Ernesto really well?
Yes, I did.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about myself going up and volunteering, to help a day, but it's just it's a nice drive. So, we want to probably go up there and do some hours here. So, that would be another potential outing to go up, and you could learn some propagation techniques and do some weeding. Weeding's always fun. If you grew up on the farm like me, you start weeding when you're 6 years old. So when I'm upset, I just go out and pull up weeds, they aren't going to complain about it, and it gives you satisfaction. Well, the other thing is, I better move on here. The other thing is that we're having a history committee here. So if anybody's interested in working on the history of the San Antonio chapter of Native Plant Society, we'd like to find some more. We've got some members. We'd like to find some more. And the other thing is City Nature Challenge is going to go on from April 26th to April 29th. That's where it's a citizen science project. A naturalist is, and we have a competition for metro areas all over the world. And we're trying to move up into the top 10 observation areas or even higher here. And so we have like 30 events already planned. I have 4 myself, that are coming, and probably more. So if you want to come out and learn your native plants and help me learn some new things too, I always am humble about that. I'm always learn something myself from people. So we're going to look at the birds, the butterflies, the bugs, whatever. Our naturalist does everything, and we try to observe all of the creatures. We've observed 11,000 species in the San Antonio metro area already. So we have a huge diversity of insects and plants here. So anyhow, look for those on Meetup here, and I'll have and we'll have the announcements of places we're going.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Okay, in case you didn't see it, the 2024 unofficial pollinator plant of the year is clammy weed. And even though I accidentally voted twice for partridge pea, clammy weed still won. It was not on purpose. Anyways, I love clammy weed too. It's awesome, especially because in the middle there you can see the pollen is kind of a seafoam green, kind of a bluish green color. And I only saw that one time when I was zooming in on a bee, and the bee was covered in seafoam green colored pollen. So it's really cool. You got to look close for that. So look out. Oh, by the way, this is not for tonight, but we purchased a bunch of clammy weed seed from DK, Douglas King Seed, and we're going to be doing some giveaways throughout the coming months. And so if you're looking for some seed, that's a good place to get it. All right, our Native Landscape Certification Program, we're offering our chapter is sponsoring 2 upcoming classes, and there are still some slots available, a few slots available in each one. So level 1, Introduction to Native Landscapes, is going to be offered over 2 days. The first day, March 30th, is virtual through Zoom, and then April 6th will be an in-person plant walk. And then our free installation and maintenance of native landscapes is a 1 day, all day, April 20th in person at Confluence Park. In order to take level 3, you need to take level 1. So if you're interested in that, please look into that. And if the cost is an issue, please contact us. We've got scholarships available. We don't want the cost for any reason to be the reason that you do not attend if you're interested in attending. So you can see the email. Hopefully the Zoom people can see it at the bottom. It's what is the email? San Antonio .org. Thank you. Not for Zoom. So San Antonio @nipsot.org. I think we need to mute somebody. Okay. All right. And so speaking of the Native Landscape Certification Program, Joan's done a great job and updated our services directory. So the folks that take these classes and pass the exams have the opportunity to be listed on our chapter directory, and they can offer services. Some people offer services for free, volunteer services. Other people charge for their services. So you can look at our directory if you're in need of any of these services. So they range anywhere from general consultation as far as what do you even have in your yard? What's native? What's not native? Those kinds of things. As well as more detailed consultations on landscape design, native landscape installation services, and maintenance services as well. So for the directory, please go to our chapter webpage. And for any questions, reach out to us at sanantonio@nipsot.org. There is an upcoming sponsored nature walk here at the park. It is Trees of Phil Hardberger Park. It's going to be led by Michael Netwich, who is awesome. And if you've never heard him speak or been to any of his trainings or classes or walks, you will want to do this if you can. This is on March 23rd, meeting here at the Urban Ecology Center at 8 a.m. So from 8 to 10 on March 23rd, you don't want to miss it. And I have a few calls for volunteers, but also these dates, if you don't already have them on your calendar, you'll want to put them on. So the first one is for the Saw Spring Bloom. We're going to have another chapter plant sale. The Spring Bloom event is actually Saturday, March 9th, but we're looking for anyone interested in volunteering for setup on Friday, March 8th, or working shifts on the event day, Saturday, March 9th. The event runs from 8:30 to 1. But our peak period is going to be early from about 9 to 11. So that's when we're going to need most people. If you are interested in volunteering for either of these days to help us with our plant sale, please reach out to nipsotsavolunteers@gmail.com. And Pam is here somewhere right there in the back. And so she's our volunteer coordinator. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Pam, I'm sorry, on the whole NICE program, I meant to mention that Pam is the reason that that was done. She stepped up and led that and made it happen, made us meet regularly, hammer out the details. So thank you very much, Pam. Sorry, I missed you on that earlier. Okay, so a few more calls for volunteers. We have an upcoming work day at the Pollinator Garden at Haven for Hope. This will be our third work day. It's scheduled for March 16th. That's a Saturday from 10 to noon. Again, nipsotvolunteers@gmail.com. If you're interested, we will be pulling weeds. It's fun. Trust me, it's fun. It is. I mean, we'll do some light pruning too, but mostly it's going to be weed pulling. It's a really cool garden. We also have a call for volunteers. There's going to be a plant sale benefiting our chapter at Pollinatives on April 6th. So we're looking for 3 different shifts, volunteers to help us. What we're going to want to do there is help the customers learn about the native plants, help them make selections based on their needs. So any information you can share with them on the native plants is great. They love it. And so our 3 shifts are listed there: 9 to noon, noon to 2:30, and 2:30 to 5. Again, nipsotsavolunteers@gmail.com. And I think this is our last call for volunteers. We're going to be participating in the Rainbow Gardens Bandera Location Society Day on May 18th. And we've got a couple of shifts for that, 10 to noon and noon to noon 2. We will be talking about our organization, native plants, and we will be highlighting a demonstration garden that some folks in the room here are working on there at the nursery. So if you're interested in volunteering, again, nipsotsavolunteers@gmail.com. Phew, that's it for all of the announcements. So our next chapter meeting is March 26th, and we will be talking about Arboretum San Antonio with Dr. Kelly Lyons, who is in the back of the room here. She's got lots of titles, one of them being a professor in the Department of Biology at Trinity University, but also Thomas Corser, who is the CEO, is kind of cut off there, of Arboretum San Antonio. So that will be a good one. Come with your questions and learn about where everything's at with that project. And for those of you on Zoom, we've got the QR code here for the Water Saver Rewards points. and also the Survey Monkey for those questions. If you're in the room and you are a SAWS rewards participant, you just need to sign the SAWS form, which is back there at the check-in table. And you don't have to take the quiz if you're in the room. But if you're on Zoom, you've got to take the quiz. So I will pull this up after our speaker tonight, so you can see it again at the end, but try to get it now if you can. Oh, I did not know that. Our last SAWS rewards. Okay, so I just found out that moving forward, this is the last time that Zoom participants will be able to participate in the rewards program. Moving forward, you will need to be in person in order to get those rewards points. Thank you, Joan. Okay, and so our speaker tonight is Wendy Leonard. She is the assistant manager for the City of San Antonio Parks and Recreation Natural Areas. And she's going to talk to us about this beautiful plant, which is a rare Texas native called the Bracted Twistflower. And while we transition to her presentation, looks like we've got maybe some door prizes for the people in the room here. Okay, so we're gonna change over. Thank you.
Okay, we've got a few books here and a Hardburger Park 2024 calendar. So I'll raffle that one off first. Last three numbers of 935. It's the calendar. 935. All right. We've got some cool books here. So we've got a butterfly and moth guide. 942. All right. The Wildflowers of Texas Hill Country. Great book. 919. Okay, well that was very sweet. Would you like the Phil Hardburger Park book?
Ask questions.
The only thing is
for the Zoom people, if it's in the room, repeat the question so they can hear it. And then I'll just monitor if there's any, I'll be ready to go with questions.
So for this one, how about 944? Okay.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Wendy.
Sure.
Take it away.
Take it away. All right.
Hold on. Okay.
Hi. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me here to speak. Let me get this on the slideshow. Where are you? Hold on. The mouse is being finicky. Help.
Yeah, I thought I got it for you.
Oh, I think it needs to still go on the slideshow. There we go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Does it need? Let me know if I need to adjust. Sometimes I start bellowing right in front of a microphone and it's a little too much projection. So yes, thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. I have spent roughly 17 years with this species, so I'm always really excited to talk about it. We have a lot of fun stories together. So there was a moment in my life where I didn't appreciate the species, but that was a small amount of time. So I've been with the city of San Antonio. In April, it will be 19 years. That makes me feel pretty old. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful experience, and 17 of those years have been with this species. And I decided early on, probably in about 2007, to start a master's thesis and look at this species and the growth factors limiting this species and what we can do to help this wonderful plant out. So my journey here started with the plants that the city of San Antonio, the populations that the city of San Antonio actually owns that are on the properties that we own. And then it has branched out to some local populations, mostly in Medina County. So I monitor Bexar County and Medina County populations. So a little bit about the species. It is, it's an annual. The plant actually has a really waxy, kind of thick texture leaf. And it's a member of the mustard family. So it's in the cruciferae. It's got that typical kind of cross pattern 4-petal leaves. The stems can be, and we'll see, they can range from a few inches tall, like the plant gets a few inches tall flowers and seeds out, to 5.5 feet tall flowers and seeds out. And again, that has a lot to do with the site conditions. The shorter leaves, as we start to look at the plant, we spoke a little bit about this at the beginning when folks were coming in. The plant looks really different throughout its growth cycle, when it starts off as a basal rosette, whenever it germinates, all the way through when it flowers and sets seed. So it's really hard for people out in the wilderness to, when they're out, you know, in the hill country looking at things, to notice this plant in December or January or November when it's a little bitty plant. The flowers, they're absolutely gorgeous. This is a flower from Eisenhower Park that I took back in 2010, a picture that I took from a flower. They typically flower April through May. We are finding that they are, like this plant right here, it's starting to bolt up. So they're flowering a little bit sooner. Now they're starting to flower in March. And then some years I've seen them flower in July. So it's really kind of interesting, the variability. The plant, which it's named for, has these bracts underneath the flower. This is actually the silique, or the seed pod. As the seed pod starts to dry out, typically in a normal year, which we all know that doesn't exist, but in a normal year, they start to dry out in June. And by July, they dehisce and open up, and the seeds start to fall out. And they don't really migrate too far from their mother plants unless gravity is at work, or surface water runoff is kind of pushing them down the hillside. So as I mentioned before, they start off as a little bitty plant that looks nothing like this plant. And they start off as a small basal rosette. And as they migrate through their life, they start to bolt up and flower, and they produce these siliques. Up here, you can see the tiny bracts underneath the flower. And then in this picture 1.3, that's powdery mildew. Powdery mildew, we don't know yet the effects on the species. It seems to occur later on in the life cycle. So as the plant is setting seed, sometimes the powdery mildew will come in. And so by the time there could be a problem, the plant may be at the end of its life cycle anyways. And we have also seen that the powdery mildew is kind of in more thickly dense canopied areas where there's lots of shrubs. If it's hiding out in shrubs trying to escape the deer herbivory, there's less airflow, and this powdery mildew can persist. So a lot of confusion out in the field. I got excited about this plant last year, and you see it from afar and you start to freak out, and you run into it and you go, darn it, it's that Arabis again. So Arabis is watercress. It's a rock cress, sorry. It grows in the Texas Hill Country, and it roughly flowers and sets seed roughly the same time that the Bracted Twistflower does. It has the same lower leaves, kind of the same lower leaves, and the same bolting structure, but the flowers are different. And then the seed pods, they all kind of point upward, and it doesn't have the bract underneath the flower. So we get a lot of that. I've been out on a lot of surveys where people think they find it, and they tend to grow hand in hand. And as you can tell, this Arabis also gets the powdery mildew as well. So again, the plant will start germinating in the fall, whenever we get those first cool, wet, cold fronts. Sometimes that's in September. This past fall, I was really excited when a cold front came through, but by the time it arrived in September, it was neither cool nor wet. It was just a wind front that came through. And so I didn't actually get plants that germinated not up until I think it was early November when we started to get those cool, moist rains and things really started to cool off. They really start to bolt up around this time of year, which is pretty early than what we've seen before. They typically start to bolt up in March, and then we have flowers in April and May. And then rarely on occasion during those wet years, I think it was in 2019 where we were actually out in the field going, I can't believe it's July and the plant is blooming. Like the plant should not be alive right now. So it really depends on the conditions. We have the species has quite a bit of threats to it, but kind of the overarching threats are the encroachment of woody species. We find that this plant tends to grow in the wild when it's unprotected from deer herbivory up in thick, dense shrub layer, usually thick, dense ash juniper, where it can be protected a little bit more, where it's harder for deer to come and munch on it. The stalks, when they start to bolt up, they taste like asparagus sprouts. And it's a mustard. It's very palatable to the deer and other ungulates. I know axis deer, and in Garner State Park, I think they have a goat issue as well that is really difficult for the species. Overbrowsing by deer, residential development, we are actually losing populations to tracts of land being bought up to have a house being put there or a neighborhood being put there. And there's some indication this species is a fire follower. I think it's more of it is a disturbance species follower. One of the populations we fenced off from deer, we actually buffered it as much as we thought, and then we buffered it some more. So that way, when we came in and put the fence in, we would be nowhere near what we thought the population would be. And that following spring, we had plants all along the bulldozed outline of where the fence was. And so we were just going, oh my gosh, this is not what we planned for, but it obviously loves that disturbance. So the other really cool thing about this plant is, one, it's endemic to the Texas Hill Country. So it occurs in the Texas Hill Country and nowhere else. It is truly a Texas native and a Hill Country Texas native. It is all of the populations occur within 1 kilometer of the Balcones fault zone, and they're kind of parched on this layer of limestone and dolomite above the Glen Rose. And I'm sorry, I'm not a rock star, I'm not a geologist, but above the Glen Rose layer. So what that looks like is that the dotted area up here, that is the dolomitic layer, and underneath the dolomitic layer is the basal nodular layer. And then that usually sits on top of this Trinity Glen Rose. Apparently the Trinity Glen Rose water doesn't really permeate. So we have a lot of seeps and springs that pop out in that layer. So we don't really know if it's a dolomitic factor. And we've actually done some studies to add that into potted plants to see if that will make them grow bigger and better and happier, or if it's a spring effect, or if it's a combination of both. But to get this combination is something that is difficult. And one thing that we're finding is we can't just go out in the wild and sprinkle seeds and hope that they'll come up in that area and boom, we've got a population. We really need to be looking for this geologic structure, because it's an edaphic species. It's following a specific formation for some reason. And so when we look at reintroduction, that definitely needs to be a factor for that species or that population to persist in that area. So optimal habitat, I hate this picture of me, but it really shows a great picture of the habitat. I am on a north facing, a lot of them are north facing. I'm on a north facing hillside. This is actually in Laurel Canyon, out in Medina County, and pretty steep area, and it is shrub. There's very few trees. The population is not protected by fencing to keep them fenced from deer, but they are growing up in the protection of a lot, like I think guajillos there, and a number of different species, Bernardia, where it can kind of grow up and get a little bit of protection from the deer. The picture down here in 3.5, this is a student who did some research work on the plant from UTSA a few years back. She was about 5'5", and this is a plant out at Rancho Diana one of the city populations that we manage. And this, you can see how huge that plant is. And when they get this big, that's a lot of seed and a lot of reproductive material entering back into the population. And then down here, whenever they're little bitty, one thing that we use to help us identify them out in the field is this purple-ish tinge underneath some of the leaves. And they start to lose that as they grow a little bit older. You can see on some of these plants, there's still a little purplish tinge. So part of my study was to look at the effects of light on the species. A lot of the species that are remaining out in the wild they're not exposed to a lot of sunlight. They are up in the shade, up underneath brush and dense canopy, and they're not really growing to their optimal capacity. So I set up some shade boxes, and we started off with pretty much full sun over here on my left-hand side, all the way to 80% shade. And I don't want to bore you guys with statistics, but the plants growing in full sun were statistically significant, greater than the ones growing in full shade. And that was for the shoot height, so how tall these plants are getting. That was for how big around the actual stalk was. And the same thing for the dry mass. So the plants growing out in the full sun did far better than the plants growing in 80% shade. And we also did a field component to this study where we had plants out in the field, out in the open. Some of the plants were in exclosures to protect them from deer, and some were not. And some were just up in the canopy in full shade. So the full shade is this 344. That was the measure of light. And then the full sun was the 1265. So plants that were out in the full sun, protected from deer, did far better than plants that were in full sun, not protected from deer. And we assumed that most of the herbivory was from deer. We observed deer. Most of the herbivory that's occurring that's detrimental to this species are the large ungulates, the deer, and some of the domestic chompers and herbivores that we have out in the wild. And the same thing for dry mass. Plants that were out in the full sun that were not protected by an actual deer cage did not do anything. They did not do well at all. And the ones that were in full shade without a cage did far better. So this can partly explain why plants are growing up in the shade as they get more protected from these herbivores than ones growing out in the wild without protection. So what does this herbivory look like? This is a picture of a plant that was completely chomped. 3 of the apices were completely chomped back by deer. Thank goodness it caused the plant to respond by growing up a secondary shoot. And that's usually what I see out in Medina County, where plants are not protected from deer. They will respond by growing up the second shoot and trying to get that reproductive material out back into the population. But the deer are hitting these plants and other plants because they're attractive to the higher nutrients that are in these shoots and the lower levels of tannins. So one thing that we're going to see is as this plant starts to shoot up, these basal leaves go away and pretty much all of the growth goes into blooming and seed production. And so the plant is putting a lot of energy into that. This removal causes a lack of photosynthetic tissue and then obviously a lack of that reproductive parts. We get a lot of potential seed loss with those herbivory events. So I am proud to say that I work for an organization that takes the protection of this species very seriously. As mentioned before, we have two populations. One is at Rancho Diana, which is in this picture, as you see here. It is a nature preserve, not open to the public on the far north side. And then we have another population at Eisenhower Park. As soon as we discovered this species on this property, we moved very quickly to obtain grants and to obtain funding to get this population fenced off from deer. And we actually worked with an Eagle Scout before I came on board to fence the Eisenhower Park population. And I'm proud to say that that fence has withstood the test of time and has been up for 20 years without any issue. So we have fenced both of our populations. This is Eisenhower Park, and you can tell that this fence, it's still being used today, and it's in pretty good condition. So we are working closely. There is a professor out of A&M who has spent a number of years working on this, species, and a lot of other members in the Streptanthus family or in the Streptanthus species. And he has found that there are significant variations within the species. So we have species that occur from Medina County to Bexar County, all the way up to Travis County. We have different populations, and some of these populations can vary quite differently from one another. And any sort of population augmentation and reintroduction really needs to take into consideration these different variations. And if we don't, we could lose some local adaptations. So if you notice down here, Eisenhower Park is listed as the lowest genetic diversity. And so I'm setting you up for something here. We are losing the population. It is bottlenecking very, very badly, despite all that we have done. And at the onset of this genetic study, a while back, it was already at risk of extirpation. And we are seeing that this population really is in dire need of assistance. And again, loss of genetic diversity. This Eisenhower Park is at the bottom. So what we moved to do was to work with Dr. Alan Pepper at A&M to really try to augment the population at Eisenhower Park. And we identified with his genetic work that seeds from Rancho Diana would be the best to augment the Eisenhower Park population. So what does that mean? So we took seeds from Rancho Diana and we put them out at Eisenhower Park in a systematic approach to try to bump up the genetics and bump up the population. Did it work? I So Eisenhower Park population, remember how big the Rancho Diana plants were, 5.5 feet. They engulfed this person, this student. Eisenhower Park, we're talking about 6 inches to maybe 2 feet. These are dinky little plants. No offense, they are trying their best, but they are really dinky. And when they're this dinky, they don't really produce a lot of reproductive material. So you can see how much smaller these saliques, the fruits, are. So that also prompted us to take these big, beautiful plants at Rancho Diana, harvest a few seeds. So we didn't harvest all the seeds from one plant. We systematically chose a couple plants from individuals throughout the entire population at Rancho Diana and collected those seeds. This was all under the oversight of Dr. Alan Pepper and quite a few other people. And we set up these plots at Eisenhower Park. And we set up little runways so we knew where we could walk and where we couldn't walk. And we took a very long time and put seed by seed in these little bitty squares. And we labeled each seed with a little marker. We put out, I'm not kidding you, hundreds of seeds at Eisenhower Park. And we did this in 2019. Dr. Alan Pepper, and I keep saying Dr. Alan Pepper because I don't want to say Dr. Pepper, but so I've resorted, he's fine with me calling him Alan, but Dr. Alan Pepper, he has been testing the tissue. So he's actually come to the park, taken tissue of Eisenhower Park original population before we even started this augmentation. He's taken samples, and he's taken samples during the entire time that this has occurred over the course of a couple of years. So this is all kind of being watched, and we're waiting to see. Visually, I'm not seeing much, but as the plants pop up, we go through, we monitor them. Right now, I'm monitoring them every single month, trying to figure out are the dynamics of what's going on out there as well, and what's happening to these seedlings. For example, this past month, we lost quite a few of the rosettes, quite a few plants. And so it's kind of interesting when you monitor a population continuously throughout its growth cycle to see the changes that are occurring. And we're trying to relate that to a number of different factors. So one factor that we're trying to look at is, okay, is rainfall playing a part in this? Can we correlate rainfall with actual plants and number of plants? So in the blue is the number of plants at Eisenhower Park, and in the red is the rainfall total, not directly on site. Dr. Alan Pepper is setting up a weather station on site so we can get a little bit more accurate data, but this is taken from kind of San Antonio, NOAA, which I think is actually taking their data from the San Antonio airport. So it's really hard to make an actual correlation, but we haven't looked at the correlation statistically. So visually, you can kind of see maybe there's a correlation. It's very hard to know for sure. So again, we're trying to tease some of that data apart to figure out, is rainfall at certain times during the growth cycle more important than other times? So that's Eisenhower Park. I have been monitoring Medina County populations for quite some time. And from a genetic perspective, they're one of the more stable. Medina County and Travis County are some of the more stable genetic parts of the entire species that we've seen, that Dr. Alan Pepper has seen. So I'm out there monitoring quite a few roadside populations, quite a few electrical easement populations, and then if I can get permission, private property populations, which that kind of comes and goes. So that's been a little difficult as well. So some of these, this was a roadside population growing right on the roadside, and now a driveway is through there. Someone has bought this lot. And so I don't know how this population is going to respond to some of that activity. And as they start to dry out, this is what the plants look like. So this is an actual salique, this brown seed pod. And so that's in the summertime. Around June, it started to brown out. And so I was last spring monitoring the Medina County populations. And, you know, it's that typical birder story of how did you wreck your car? I thank goodness I didn't wreck my car, but, you know, you always try and, okay, I almost wrecked my car. I was looking at this incredible hawk, or I was doing roadside plant identification, but I saw a for sale sign and on a tight turn. And I said, what? And so I pulled over and looked, and sure enough, this property has 8 acres of Bracted Twistflower. And these are pictures actually taken on the property. I did not trespass. I did get permission from the listing agent to go check out the property. And so I did that and worked feverishly to I worked with Fish and Wildlife, Texas Parks and Wildlife, Green Spaces Alliance, a number of different organizations to try and get this population protected. This population, or this species, was listed as threatened last year. And right about the time that I was reaching out to a number of these different organizations going, I know it's listed, you have 8 acres of, you know, beautiful plants. Can you please do something? And I got the same response. It is too small and it doesn't back up to any sort of easement or any sort of protected land. If it was bigger, we would be interested. And so the property went offline. It was delisted from realtor.com last fall. And I thought, oh my goodness. So, but something told me in the back of my head, you have an opportunity to get all your ducks lined up in a row. It's going to come back on the market in the springtime, and you're going to have a second opportunity. So I thought, I'm absolutely crazy, but I'm going to try this. So I got my nonprofit going and started a GoFundMe page because the people at Texas Parks and Wildlife laughed at me and said, you should just start a GoFundMe page. So I said, that's a brilliant idea. I'm going to do that. And so I started a GoFundMe page. And I also started a little bit of, there's a apparel store called Bonfire where you can actually make apparel and sell it. And part of the proceeds go to a nonprofit. So, tote bags and all sorts of fun stuff on there. If you all are interested, if you all have ideas on people that I haven't contacted yet, I have a whole laundry list of people that I've contacted to try and get this property preserved for the Bracted Twistflower, because if we don't, we are going to lose another 8 acres to residential development. And so challenges moving forward for this species include private and right-of-way populations. They are not managed properly. They are mowed at the wrong time of the year. They're not protected from deer. They are not cut, you know, the woody species are not cut back. So that way the plants, once they are protected from deer, can get the optimal sunlight. And the same thing with the public populations. So the publicly owned populations. Again, I'm proud to say that we have been told that the city of San Antonio is the example of how other cities to our north should manage their populations. And a lot of those cities to our north put recreation first. So there's some issues with mountain biking and not adequately protecting those populations from deer. We talked about genetic inbreeding and the detriment to that. We've lost brightleaf to some genetic inbreeding, I believe, and then we're getting ready to lose Eisenhower Park unless this augmentation works out a little bit more in its favor. Deer herbivory, suboptimal habitat, and I don't really know what factors the current and future, climatic, just in this area, the city of San Antonio, the urban heat island effect and everything else that's going on. One thing that I like to do, and I've been doing this since I started working at the natural areas, I've been keeping this ongoing graph. Again, NOAA weather data. So this is publicly available. You guys can go get this and make the exact same plot. This is San Antonio, and this is plotting the temperature since it's been recorded, the average yearly temperature since it's been recorded, 1886. I went back to see what was the last continuous year, and it was 1886, all the way up to 2023. And what it shows is over a degree of temperature with a huge spike these last couple of years. What sort of impact is this having on our local populations like Eisenhower Park, where it is being paved all around? And we are changing at least our local climate. And also, what effect is rain having and rainfall having on the species? So this is quite interesting because it's kind of deceptive, showing that, well, it looks like we're getting more rain. And again, I went back to the last year where there was consecutive data. So 1947, every single year, all the way up to 2023. And it looks like we're getting more rain on average these last 40 years. But what this graph shows also, if you look a little bit deeper, is the extreme rainfall events, the extreme deficits, the extreme floods and deposits that we're having in the precipitation factor. Is that also having a detrimental effect on the species? And I think that in some instances it is. We had quite a deluge of rain a month ago, and it looks like some of the plants at Eisenhower Park kind of rotted out. And so when we get these extreme high density rain events, is that too much for these plants? And you can see with this graph, the up and down spikes in the last 40 years have been pretty extreme, more so than 40 years prior to me. So I really want to pull that data out and see how many extreme weather events have we had locally with respect to precipitation. So I get this question a lot, so I went ahead and put a slide just because to kind of help me answer this question to the best of my ability. So this question has popped up a lot throughout the last several years, is why don't we just start handing seed out and everybody can grow it in their backyard and it won't be threatened anymore? And so first of all, I had to read up on the laws of seed collection for threatened species. So there are some rules and regulations now that it is listed as threatened to collecting seed, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Texas Parks and Wildlife, they need to actually be consulted with prior to any seed collection to make sure you are not breaking any laws. And then also the plants grown in your garden they lose whatever trait they're adapting to in the wild. And one good example of this, and I can attest to this, and this happened at the San Antonio Botanical Garden when they were growing the plants, is that these plants have built-in dormancy. So not all of the seeds pop up at once in 1 year. A lot of plants have this. 10% of the seeds that are out will pop up. And if that year all of a sudden the spigot runs dry and there's no more rain, well, it wasn't a huge loss for that year. The next year, 10% will come up. So when we grow it at home or we grow it in the greenhouse, one thing that happens is that we inadvertently select for that dormancy to not be a factor for us, because we're collecting seed from plants that germinated, and we're not going back and collecting the seed from plants that didn't germinate that year. So we wind up selecting for dormancy to not be a problem for us. And that is that's an adaptation for the species to deal with some of the local climatic issues that it has experienced. And we found that this species has specific site conditions that need to be met in order for populations to persist in the wild. So any reintroduction needs to have those specific site characteristics identified before we try to put seed out or plants out in those locations. And then lastly, we know that there's genetic variability among the species, among the different populations of the species. So whenever we do decide to reintroduce a population or introduce a population or augment a population, we really need to take a look at what the recommendations are for that area. So that way we're not doing a detriment to the local populations that may be in that area that have adapted for a different set of local climatic or any sort of conditions. So in summary, the Bracted Twistflower, it was recently listed as threatened, and the Rancho Diana population is stable. It seems to be doing really, really well. Eisenhower Park population is at risk of extirpation. And augmentation so far has seemed to have little effect on the plants at Eisenhower, but we're still waiting for data that has been collected to be analyzed a little bit more. We're still waiting for those years to kind of come out in the plants and see what sort of growth we might wind up having. And plants do their best under full sunlight, but we've got to protect them from deer. And I don't think it's something that, oh, well, if we just hunt more deer, it would be better. I think for the populations that we have right now, the focus needs to be on fencing those populations from the deer. And there is also that geology factor as well. So if you guys want to contact me about the city populations, this is my email address. You're more than welcome to. I also have my personal information here if you want to contact me regarding the Medina County populations and how, you know, any ideas you guys have that I have overlooked. But I have reached out to a lot of people. So, but I'm definitely willing to have that conversation. So thank you all so much for your time. I finished a couple minutes shy of 8, which was my goal. So thank you so much. Okay, sure.
When you said 10% dormancy, is that from measured research or propagation?
So the question was, when I said 10% dormancy, was that from what we found in the research, or was that just an example for a figure of speech? That is typically what we found from research. I know that if I put out 100 seeds, I will be lucky if I get between 10 to 20 plants. So really about 10 to 20% of those plants will germinate. It varies from population to population. I was supposed to grow Eisenhower Park population this fall, and I've never felt like such a failure in my entire life. And I actually reached out to U.S. Fish and Wildlife and to Alan Pepper and said, I've grown this species for 17 years, and it's just the degree of genetic inbreeding. So that dormancy is a lot more. But I would say on average, it's between 10 to 20%. Yes, Jerry.
You're suggesting that dormancy is mostly inbreeding and genetic versus actual physical characteristics, because physical characteristics and rainfall and where these dormancy is. You see that in any species. You can look at bluebonnets and you can see that sort of dormancy type issue irregardless of genetics.
Yes. So the question was, is dormancy genetic inbreeding or an adaptive strategy, pretty much. And so I have always been under the impression that it was a adaptive strategy, and it is, but there's also research to show that that can be a characteristic of genetic inbreeding, is that their dormancy is a little bit stronger. And what I did find with those plants too is that the die-off right after they germinated was like nothing I've ever seen before. And so I've found out recently from Alan Pepper that that is kind of a bad sign from a genetic perspective. So that may be a characteristic of something a little bit more serious, but typically speaking, that dormancy is an adaptive strategy.
We're also putting in those plants with a different population, putting into a different substrate. So I don't think you can ignore the substrate, and you can't ignore the microbial content and other things of the soil.
Exactly. Yes, that's a good point, as well as that each site is adapted for specific site. Each population is adapted to specific site conditions. I just needed better microbes. Thank you. Yes. So the question was the 8 acres, is the Nature Conservancy interested? And is it too small for them? And the answer to that is the folks that I spoke with about land acquisition with the Nature Conservancy said yes. They said it's unfortunate that it's not right close to Laurel Canyon. I'm like, well, that's pretty close. So Laurel Canyon is actually a conservation easement, and part of their population is in the conservation easement, and the rest of it is on private property. So I did reach out to Nature Conservancy, and I had another person reach out to a few other people as well, and it's that size that's an issue. Well, so the question was that's going to be sold to a private person, and that's what I'm working hard. I feel like the second chance, I was given a second chance to do a better job at trying to get that property protected. So I've applied for grants. I am I'm not stopping at any cost. A lot of, I have my days where I think this is futile. What am I doing? And then there's that voice in the back of my head saying, keep going. So I'm trying. I was given a second chance when this property was put back on the market, literally 33 days ago. I checked 30 days ago, and I said, well, let me just look and see, everything came together with the nonprofit, and let me just look and see. And of course it was back on the market. So definitely not going to give up until it's done. But yes, it will be lost to residential, large, those tracts are between at least 5 acre tracts for residential. It's hard to explain Myco, Texas. It is not in an actual residential development. It is just kind of a plot. It's about 8 acres, but typically the properties in that area are at least 5 acres. No house. The question was, is there a house on it already? And no house. Yes, sir. That's a really good question. So the question was, is if I did any disturbance, and if so, what time of year did I do it? I have a fire box that I made, and I haven't found anybody that will let me use it. So, so I really want to use it. I would love to burn plots and see what sort of effect that has. Well, so we do have the anecdotal. When we made that fence, we were far away from, and I can't tell you how many feet away we were, but we felt like we were far enough away, but there was enough seed in that soil that when we opened that soil up and disturbed the heck out of it, the plants just popped up, and they took that as an opportunity. And it's funny because we said, okay, and we got all these little fences and we just started putting them up, because we have to protect those plants. And so it was funny when we said we need more fencing material. So yeah. Okay, some of the Zoom questions. What are your thoughts on supplemental water for the seedlings? Out in the wild, I have actually come to terms with the possibility of getting brave enough to ask Fish and Wildlife and the other folks helping us with this population, if we should be watering that population since it's at such a risk of extirpation. If we should, we've put out as many stops as we can. Why not try that as a last ditch resort? So, and see what happens. It's a real shame that this is a protected population. It's a fenced population. We're clearing it to make sure it has sun. We could probably clear it a little bit more. So all the ducks are lined up, but it was already at that low end of genetic diversity 15 years ago when that genetic study was originally done. And now we're at, yeah, and now we're at what that looks like in real life. So who would own the 8 acres if we raise the funds to buy it? So I've set up a nonprofit. And so the nonprofit would own that piece of property and manage that population. Or if we can find another organization interested in purchasing it, then I can move forward with working with that organization to get fencing, to get everything involved to really help protect that population. One thing is that the nonprofit that I've set up is also to really provide an outdoor research area. There's a lot of students that have been at UTSA and other institutions that have actually done research work on this species. And it's not just limited to those folks. There are folks outside these institutions. And so this would be an area where they would get access to do some of that important research work. Okay.
What if we find this species or other rare plants growing on their own around our yards or in our alleys or other places?
You know, so I think, there's great resources that are free. iNaturalist, of course. And then I always tell people, send it to, if you think you have Streptanthus on your property, oh my goodness, you've have my email address. On here, I have my personal cell phone number. Please let me know. I will not be very intrusive. I'll just confirm, and then we'll go from there. And no, so definitely reach out. I'm sorry. I know I'll be there within the hour. Where do you live? I'll be on your back doorstep. Yes. No. So definitely reach out. There's a lot of great resources. And if you think you have Streptanthus, or if you're a property owner in the hill country and you think you want the Bracted Twistflower on your land, I can definitely work to make that happen and see if it's an appropriate site. Yes. Horrible. Yes. Yes, definitely. So let me see if I can recap these questions. So question number 1 was about conservation easements. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Okay, so the question was about conservation easements and if what the rules and regulations are about fencing that population if it's found on their property. And so this is one example that I want to give you, and hopefully it'll answer your question, is Laurel Canyon. Laurel Canyon has a conservation easement on their property. About half, I think it's down to a quarter of their Bracted Twistflower population occurs on the conservation easement, and the rest of it occurs on private property. I went to work with the homeowners association to get funding to fence that population in its entirety. And it was entirely dependent upon the cooperation of the landowners. So we can go back and say the population on the conservation easement needs to be fenced and just fence that little population. We could try to get funding to do that. But if a private property owner is not on board, then there's not much that can be done, even when it's listed as threatened. It's more for the public property, the public owned property. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so the question was if the property owner has a small population and they fenced off that little population, could they get credit for that area in the form of easements? So what I've found in my search for grants is that there's a lot of resources out there to help property owners. And this kind of goes back to your question, which I'm sorry, I didn't answer the second part of your question regarding property taxes. Unless I think, and I'm not the best to comment on the easement issue, but you have to be all the way in to get all of the benefit. And so a lot of the property taxes in the Hill Country are they're outrageous. And so on the side, I am a beekeeper. There's a population and there's a property in Bandera where I have planted these plants in appropriate sites where they have an ag exemption for bees, but that's between 5 to 20 acres. So there's some ways to work around some of those issues. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of energy and a lot of patience. And find the right landowner. Yes. Yes, Jerry.
What's the approximate price they're asking for this 8 acres?
So the question was, what's the approximate price that they're asking for the 8 acres? Y'all are gonna make me go home and cry because y'all are just gonna laugh. 164,000. $20,000 an acre.
So that's in the ballpark
Of reasonability. Yes. Yes. There was a question back here. Yes. So the question, this is actually a funny story. So the question have we, pretty much to sum it up, have we searched all of the city lands to make sure that we found all the populations that could be occurring on city property? And how do we find these populations? We had known about the Eisenhower Park population for quite some time. I was many years ago, officing out of Rancho Diana and starting out my thesis work. I think I was halfway through my thesis work, and I get a phone call from my coworker. Many of you may remember her, Jane Neal, and I couldn't understand her. And it was just this high pitch. I'm like, Jane, what in the world is going on? And it sum it up, she had lost her cell phone and she spent a long time searching for it. And when she found it, it was beautifully laid next to a small bracted twistflower plant. And she said, no, it can't be. And she looked and she saw it, and there were little bitty babies everywhere. And she said, I now that I have my cell phone, I have to call Wendy. I'm pretty sure this is it. And so she called me, and it was one of those, I'm on my way, I'll be right there. And so I was there lightning cool, fast. I was there super fast. And we did our happy dances out in the field that we found this population. So we are really blessed to have a great relationship with the local geologist who makes us these really pretty maps that show us where that layer, that dolomitic layer, where it meets these magical, areas. And we have set out and searched those areas. Have we searched them exhaustively over the course of many years? No. But I have been, thanks to bird surveys, all over these properties, and I'm still waiting to find more plants. Hopefully, we will. And then, there's always the opportunity to acquire more land and to search those properties for populations as well. Jerry.
So have you searched out what basic costs in state?
Yeah.
So I assume that's a geologically appropriate, possibly, or not quite?
Not quite. So the question was about ABK, natural area that Texas Parks and Wildlife owns off of 46, Highway 46. And I haven't seen the geologic map for that piece of property yet. But just looking at it, it's pretty tricky. I don't think there's probably areas that may end up being appropriate sites. But the study that we were going to set up there was looking at disturbance. We had burn plots, we had, weed whack plots, we had chemically treated plots. I shouldn't say that too loud. And then we had just the control plots. And so that's where that study was going to be set up. Okay. Okay.
8:15, so we're going to go ahead and thank Wendy one more time.
And I have plants if anybody just wants to look at them and see them. I mean, they're green, they're not blooming.
And Wendy, somebody already made a donation.
Aw,
So thanks to that person. Thanks again. I'm going to go ahead and pull up that QR code again. Everybody wave bye to the Zoom people. What? The Zoom? Yeah. Awesome.